Ladies and gentlemen, this is ECON211 Macroeconomics. We are busy with Study Unit 3 covering Chapter 7 in Fourie and Burger. We are adjusting the ADAS model for an inflationary environment. In the previous video, I explained how we adjust the ADAS model, and in this one we'll look at changes in demand and shocks to supply and how we can use our new model to explain those. Let's start with an expected inflation rate of 4%. Now, in our original ADAS model, that inflation of 4% would have implied a change or an increase in the aggregate demand moving to the right and a supply adjustment process pushing the economy back to the long-run equilibrium level of output YS. And this change from P0 to P1, that would have been only the increase in inflation pushing up the price level. In our adjusted model, we now know that our augmented AD curve and our Phillips curve short run, they are stationary in this plane of inflation and output or income. So any 4% change in the price level would not change any of them. It's all expected. The inflation rate at pi 0, that would be equal to this 4%, and nothing changes, and that's it. The economy is still in equilibrium at the long-term level YS. Now let's suppose that there's an increase in nominal government spending or in investment that causes aggregate spending to increase 6%. In our old model, that would have meant a big move of the AD curve up and to the right, as the arrow there indicates, temporarily pushing up output and income to the level Y1 and increasing the price level to P2. In our new model, a very similar thing happens. The augmented AD curve moves to the right to AD prime 2, and you can see there's a new equilibrium at a higher rate of inflation and this increased level of output Y1. Now, from each of these points, there still needs to be a supply adjustment process, and we'll look at that next. The supply adjustment process is very much similar to what we learned in the ADAS model in Chapter 6. So let's say that there's this increase in demand, increasing the inflation from pi 0 to pi 1. The AD prime 1 curve moves to the right over there, and you're at this temporary increase in output to Y1. Now, at this point, the expected inflation rate was Y0, that original 4%, but now inflation has gone up to pi 1, and that now means that there is upward pressure on wages. Inflation expectations are such that wages are renegotiated upwards and costs start to increase, and your short-run Phillips curve, the PC, moves up to PCSR1. And there's another round of this process of the current inflation rate being higher than the expected inflation rate, again feeding into wages and contracts and prices and pushing up your Phillips curve short run again until you're back at the long run equilibrium level of output at the output and income level YS and the new inflation rate of pi 2. So the adjustment process is very similar, but now the key driver is the difference between the expected inflation and the actual inflation rate and how that feeds into wage negotiations and adjustments, which feeds into costs, which moves the Phillips curve. The important policy implication to note here is that it's not sustainable to have the economy grow faster than the long-run equilibrium level of output for a long time. The end result of that is the economy returning to this level YS, but at a much higher rate of inflation. So what does a supply shock look like in this adjusted ADAS model of ours? Let's say that there's a supply shock that moves the short run and the long run Phillips curve to the left. So we start over here at an initial equilibrium at the long run level of output y is 0 at inflation rate of pi 0, and then there's a supply shock that moves the PC short run over here to the left, and it also moves the Phillips curve long run over here to the left. Now initially it pushes up inflation to pi 1 and it reduces output to y1. At this point there is again a supply adjustment process that takes place. So at inflation pi 1, the current inflation rate is higher than the expected rate. That leads to upward pressure on wages, which increases cost, which again moves the short run Phillips curve to the left, and an inflation rate of pi 2 at the new long run level of y is 2. Now, policymakers can decide that they need to get the economy out of this rut, and they decide they're going to increase government spending, pushing up the AD curve from the equilibrium over here all the way over there. For a short while, they are able to increase the level of production and income back to y is 0. But we know that at this point, the current inflation rate is much higher than the expected inflation rate, and that will then be built into wage claims. It will add to costs. It will move this Phillips curve left again up until this point over here somewhere, where you're back at your long run equilibrium at a much, much higher level of inflation. So the conclusion is that you have noticed that the demand disturbances and the supply shocks are explained in a way that is very similar to the original ADAS model of Chapter 6. But now we're doing it in a real-world inflationary context. Our final video for this chapter takes a closer look at the Phillips curve concept and the lessons that it holds for policymakers. Stay tuned.